Commercial airline pilots are trained to remain calm under pressure. They navigate storms, mechanical failures, and countless emergencies with practiced composure. But what happens when something appears in the sky that defies every principle of aviation they've ever learned? What do you do when the impossible hovers directly above one of the busiest airports in the world, witnessed by dozens of professionals, yet officially dismissed as nothing more than weather? This is not a story from the distant past or some remote location. This happened in broad daylight at Chicago O'Hare International Airport, one of the most monitored pieces of airspace on the planet. Chicago has always been a city of ambition and steel. Built on the shores of Lake Michigan in the mid-1800s, it grew from a trading post into an industrial powerhouse. By the early 20th century, it had become a transportation hub, connecting the eastern and western United States by rail and road. When aviation took flight, Chicago adapted once again. Municipal Airport opened in 1927, later renamed O'Hare International, in honor of naval aviator Edward O'Hare, a Medal of Honor recipient killed in the Pacific during World War II. By the 1960s, O'Hare had become the busiest airport in the world. It held that title for decades. Even today, it handles more than 80 million passengers annually and serves as a crucial node in global air travel. The airport operates around the clock with nearly 2,400 flights taking off and landing every single day. At any given moment, dozens of aircraft taxi across its runways, while air traffic controllers guide planes through some of the most congested airspace in North America. The people who work at O'Hare are professionals: pilots, mechanics, ground crew, gate agents, air traffic controllers. They spend their entire careers around aircraft. They know what belongs in the sky and what doesn't. They can identify planes by silhouette alone. They understand weather patterns, cloud formations, and atmospheric phenomena. They are not easily fooled. This makes what happened on a gray November afternoon all the more difficult to dismiss. November in Chicago is cold and overcast. The city sits on the edge of winter, caught between autumn's fade and the deep freeze to come. The sky hangs low and heavy, a blanket of gray that seems to press down on the flat Illinois landscape. On the 7th of November, 2006, the weather was typical for the season. Clouds sat at around 1,900 feet, a solid ceiling that blocked the sun and cast everything below in dull, colorless light. Rain threatened but had not yet arrived. It was the kind of day where the horizon blurs into the sky, where distances feel compressed and uncertain. O'Hare was busy, as always. United Airlines operated a major hub from the airport's Concourse C, and the afternoon shift was in full swing. Ramp workers loaded luggage onto planes, while mechanics performed routine inspections. Gate agents processed boarding passes and answered passenger questions. Pilots reviewed flight plans and checked weather reports. It was a Tuesday, unremarkable in every way, until 4:15 inches the afternoon. A United Airlines employee working on the ramp near Gate C-17 looked up. Something caught his attention above the terminal building. It was a dark object, circular in shape, hovering completely still beneath the cloud cover. He stared at it for several seconds, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. It wasn't moving. It made no sound. It simply hung there in the gray afternoon sky, directly over the gate. He called out to a colleague, then another. Within minutes, a small group had gathered on the tarmac, all of them looking up at the same thing. Word spread quickly. More employees came out to see. Ramp workers, mechanics, pilots waiting for their flights. A United supervisor stepped outside. A manager followed. They all saw it. A solid, metallic-looking disc, estimated to be between 20 and 30 feet in diameter, hovering motionless approximately 1,500 feet above the ground. One witness described it as dark gray, almost black, with a clearly defined circular shape. Another said it looked like a spinning frisbee, though they couldn't be certain it was rotating. Several people noted that it appeared solid, not translucent or fuzzy, like a balloon or piece of debris. It had sharp edges, a defined structure. It looked manufactured, deliberate, as if someone had placed it there on purpose. The object remained in position for several minutes. Employees continued to gather, pointing upward and speaking in low, confused tones. Some pulled out their phones, though few managed to capture clear images. The object was distant, and phone cameras in 2006 were far less capable than today. Most photos came out blurry or showed only a dark smudge against the overcast sky. But the human witnesses were unanimous. They all saw the same thing, a disc-shaped object, hovering silently above one of the busiest airports in the world. Then, without warning, it moved, but not in the way aircraft move. It didn't bank or turn. It didn't gradually ascend. Instead, it shot straight up at incredible speed, punching through the cloud layer and disappearing from view. The movement was so rapid that several witnesses described it as instantaneous, as if the object had simply vanished. But it left behind something even more startling. Where the disk had been, a perfectly circular hole had formed in the clouds. The solid grey overcast now had a neat, round opening, as if someone had used a cookie cutter to remove a section of sky. Sunlight streamed through the gap, illuminating the ground below. The witnesses stood in stunned silence. The hole remained visible for several minutes before the clouds slowly closed over it again. By then, more than a dozen United Airlines employees had seen the object. Some estimates put the number closer to 20. Pilots, mechanics, managers, ramp supervisors, people with years of experience in aviation, people who knew the difference between a plane and a helicopter, between a weather balloon and a drone. They had all watched the same event unfold, and none of them could explain it. One of the witnesses was a United mechanic with over 20 years of experience. He had worked on every type of commercial aircraft in the fleet. He knew how planes moved, how they sounded, how they interacted with the environment. What he saw that afternoon violated every rule of physics and aviation he understood. The object had no visible means of propulsion. It produced no exhaust, no vapor trail, no disturbance in the air around it. It simply hovered, defying gravity, and then accelerated upward at a speed no conventional aircraft could match. Another witness, a ramp supervisor, later described the moment the object shot through the clouds as the most unsettling part of the entire encounter. The speed was impossible, the lack of sound was impossible, and the hole it left behind, that perfect circle of clear sky, was something he had never seen in his entire career. Weather doesn't behave that way. Clouds don't part like that. Something physical had to punch through them with enough force to create that opening. But whatever it was, it defied explanation. A United Airlines pilot who witnessed the event from the cockpit of his aircraft later spoke about the experience in careful, measured terms. He was trained to remain calm, to assess situations logically, to avoid jumping to conclusions. But he admitted that what he saw that day challenged everything he knew about flight. The object's acceleration was beyond anything he had encountered in his career. Modern fighter jets can achieve incredible speeds, but they require runway space to take off, and they produce deafening noise. This object went from a dead stop to an estimated speed of several hundred miles per hour in less than a second, with no sound, no preparation, no visible means of propulsion. It simply left. Not everyone on the ground that day believed what they were seeing. Some employees dismissed it as a reflection, a trick of light against the low clouds. Others suggested it might be a weather balloon, though that theory quickly fell apart when the object shot upward. Balloons drift. They don't accelerate vertically at high speed. A few people wondered if it could be some kind of experimental military aircraft, but that seemed unlikely. O'Hare is civilian airspace, heavily monitored and regulated. An unauthorized military test over one of the busiest airports in the country would be reckless and illegal. The Federal Aviation Administration was notified of the incident. United Airlines management contacted the FAA's regional office, reporting that multiple employees had witnessed an unidentified object hovering over the airport. The FAA's response was swift and dismissive. They claimed there had been no radar contact with any unknown object. They suggested the witnesses had seen a weather phenomenon, possibly a hole-punch cloud, a rare atmospheric event where ice crystals create circular gaps in cloud cover. But the witnesses knew what they had seen. A hole-punch cloud doesn't hover in one place for several minutes. It doesn't accelerate upward at impossible speeds. It doesn't have a solid, metallic appearance. The FAA's explanation satisfied no one, least of all the people who had been standing on the tarmac that afternoon. They knew the difference between a cloud formation and a physical object. They had watched it with their own eyes, and some had even seen it through binoculars. It was real, it was solid, and it was unlike anything they had encountered before. Days passed. The story began to circulate among airport employees, whispered in break rooms and discussed over coffee. Some witnesses were reluctant to speak publicly, worried about damaging their professional reputations. Others felt compelled to share what they had seen, frustrated by the FAA's refusal to investigate. A few employees contacted local news outlets, hoping to bring attention to the incident, but the story remained largely under the radar for weeks. Then, in early January of 2007, the Chicago Tribune picked it up. Reporter John Hilkovich had received a tip about the sighting and began investigating. He interviewed multiple witnesses, reviewed internal United Airlines communications, and filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the FAA. What he uncovered was a pattern of evasion and denial. The FAA maintained that no radar contact had been made, but they also refused to launch a formal investigation. They dismissed the incident as a weather event, despite testimony from experienced aviation professionals who insisted otherwise. Hilkovich's article appeared on the 1st of January, 2007. It detailed the sighting, included witness testimony, and questioned the FAA's reluctance to investigate. The story quickly gained national attention. News outlets across the country picked it up. Television programs featured interviews with some of the witnesses. The O'Hare UFO incident, as it came to be known, became one of the most widely reported unexplained aerial phenomena in recent history. Public reaction was mixed. Skeptics dismissed the sighting as mass hysteria or misidentification. They pointed to the lack of clear photographic evidence and the FAA's official explanation. But believers saw it as proof that something extraordinary was happening in our skies, something the government refused to acknowledge. The witnesses themselves remained consistent in their accounts. They had seen an object, it had been real, and it had defied conventional explanation. The FAA never changed its position. In their official statement, they described the incident as a weather phenomenon and declined to investigate further. They claimed that since there had been no impact on flight operations and no radar contact, there was no reason to pursue the matter. This response angered many of the witnesses, who felt their credibility was being dismissed without proper consideration. Some of them had decades of aviation experience. They were not prone to panic or misidentification. They knew what they had seen, and they wanted answers. One of the more troubling aspects of the incident was the radar question. O'Hare is one of the most heavily monitored airports in the world. Multiple radar systems track every aircraft in the area, ensuring safe separation and efficient traffic flow. If an object had been hovering over Gate C-17 for several minutes, radar should have detected it. But the FAA claimed there had been no contact. This raised two possibilities. Either the object was invisible to radar, which would suggest technology far beyond current aviation capabilities, or the radar systems had failed to detect it for some other reason. Some researchers have pointed out that radar works by bouncing radio waves off solid objects. If the object at O'Hare was made of a material that absorbed or deflected radar signals, it might not have appeared on screens. Stealth aircraft use similar technology to evade detection, but even stealth planes are not completely invisible to radar. They simply reduce their radar signature. A completely undetectable object would represent a significant technological leap, one that raises uncomfortable questions about who built it and why it was hovering over a civilian airport. Another theory suggested that the object was simply too small or too stationary for radar systems to register. Air traffic control radar is designed to track fast-moving aircraft, not hovering objects. It filters out stationary contacts to avoid clutter from buildings, towers, and other fixed structures. If the disk was hovering perfectly still, the radar system might have ignored it as background noise. But this theory doesn't explain how the object accelerated upwards so quickly without triggering any alarms. A rapid vertical ascent should have registered on multiple systems, yet nothing was recorded. The witnesses themselves have remained consistent over the years. In follow-up interviews, they reiterate the same details. The object was solid, metallic, and disc-shaped. It hovered silently for several minutes before shooting straight up through the clouds. It left a circular hole in the overcast. It moved at a speed no conventional aircraft could achieve. These accounts have not wavered, despite skepticism and ridicule from some quarters. One of the most credible witnesses was a United Airlines mechanic who had been working near Gate C-17 that afternoon. He described the object as approximately 24 feet in diameter, dark gray in color, with a smooth, featureless surface. He estimated its altitude at around 1,500 feet, placing it well below the cloud ceiling. He watched it for nearly 5 minutes, during which time it remained completely motionless. When it finally moved, the acceleration was so sudden and so rapid that he initially thought it had simply disappeared. Only later, when he looked up and saw the hole in the clouds, did he realize it had shot upward. Another witness, a ramp supervisor, described a sense of unease while watching the object. He couldn't explain why, but he felt as though it was observing them, as though it was aware of their presence. This is a common theme in UFO encounters. Witnesses often report a feeling of being watched, a sense that the object or whatever controls it is intelligent and purposeful. Whether this is a psychological reaction to an unexplained event or something more remains unclear. The incident has been analyzed by numerous UFO researchers and aviation experts. Some believe it represents compelling evidence of extraterrestrial visitation. Others suggest it could be a classified military project, perhaps a drone or experimental aircraft being tested without public knowledge. A few skeptics maintain that it was simply a weather anomaly, despite the testimony of multiple trained observers. But no definitive explanation has ever been provided. What makes the O'Hare incident particularly significant is the credibility of the witnesses. These were not casual observers or UFO enthusiasts. They were aviation professionals with years of experience. They had no reason to fabricate a story, and in many cases they were reluctant to speak publicly for fear of damaging their careers. The fact that so many of them came forward despite these concerns lends weight to their accounts. The FAA's refusal to investigate also raises questions. If dozens of employees at a major airport report seeing an unidentified object hovering over their facility, shouldn't that warrant at least a cursory investigation? Even if the object posed no immediate threat, the fact that it was unidentified should have been cause for concern. Aviation safety depends on knowing what is in the sky at all times. An unexplained object, regardless of its origin, represents a potential hazard. Some researchers have pointed to similar incidents at other airports. In 1986, a Japan Airlines cargo flight over Alaska reported being followed by a massive unidentified object for more than 30 minutes. The pilot, Captain Kenju Terauchi, described it as walnut-shaped, with glowing lights, and far larger than any known aircraft. The FAA investigated that incident, though they ultimately concluded that the pilot had misidentified celestial bodies or reflections. Terauchi maintained his account for years, insisting that what he saw was a solid, physical object. In 1994, Air France pilots reported seeing a large, disc-shaped object over Paris. It appeared on radar briefly before vanishing. French authorities investigated, but found no explanation. In 2004, U.S. Pine Navy pilots encountered unidentified objects off the coast of San Diego, events that were later confirmed by the Pentagon and investigated as part of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. These incidents suggest that whatever was seen at O'Hare is part of a larger pattern of unexplained aerial phenomena. The question remains, what was hovering over O'Hare that November afternoon? If it was a weather phenomenon, why did it appear solid and metallic to multiple witnesses? If it was a drone or experimental aircraft, why was it operating over a busy civilian airport without authorization? If it was something else entirely, something not of human origin, why was it there? What was it observing? And why did it leave so suddenly, punching through the clouds at impossible speed? The witnesses have no answers. The FAA has provided none. The incident remains officially unexplained, filed away as a curiosity, a footnote in aviation history. But for the people who stood on the tarmac that day, who looked up and saw something that defied explanation, the memory lingers. They know what they saw, they know it was real, and they know that somewhere, in the skies above one of the busiest airports in the world, something appeared that should not have been there. Years later, some of the witnesses still speak about the incident, though many prefer to remain anonymous. They describe a lingering frustration, a sense that their experience was dismissed without serious consideration. They wonder if others have seen similar things, if there are more sightings that go unreported because people fear ridicule or professional consequences. They wonder what might have happened if the object had not left peacefully, if it had descended instead of ascending, if it had interfered with flight operations. Aviation is built on precision and predictability. Pilots and air traffic controllers rely on rules, on systems that work the same way every time. When something disrupts that order, when something appears that doesn't follow the rules, it creates uncertainty. And uncertainty in aviation can be dangerous. The O'Hare incident did not result in any accidents or injuries, but it raised uncomfortable questions about what else might be out there, unseen and undetected, moving through airspace we assume we control. The circular hole in the clouds has never been fully explained. Hole-punch clouds do occur naturally, but they form through a gradual process involving ice crystals and temperature differentials. They don't appear suddenly in the wake of a rapidly ascending object. The witnesses described the hole forming almost instantly, as if the object had physically displaced the cloud layer. This would require significant force, far more than a weather balloon or piece of debris could generate. It would require something with mass and velocity, something traveling at extraordinary speed. Some researchers have suggested that the object might have been using some form of propulsion that disrupted the surrounding atmosphere. Electromagnetic fields, ionization, or other advanced technologies could potentially create such an effect. But these are speculations, theories built on incomplete data. Without physical evidence, without radar confirmation, without clear photographs, it is impossible to say with certainty what happened that day. What we are left with is testimony. Testimony from credible witnesses, from people with no reason to lie, from professionals who understand the sky and the machines that fly through it. They saw something they could not identify, they reported it, and they were dismissed. Whether that dismissal was justified or whether it represents a failure to confront an uncomfortable reality remains an open question. Chicago O'Hare continues to operate as one of the busiest airports in the world. Planes take off and land every few minutes. Air traffic controllers guide hundreds of flights through the same airspace where the object once hovered. Ramp workers load baggage, mechanics inspect engines, and pilots review flight plans. Life goes on, routine and predictable. But for a brief moment in November of 2006, something disrupted that routine. Something appeared that shouldn't have been there, and then it was gone. The skies above us are vast and mostly empty. We assume we know what moves through them. We build systems to track and monitor, to ensure safety and order. But every so often something slips through, something that doesn't show up on radar, that doesn't follow the rules, that leaves witnesses shaken and uncertain. The O'Hare incident is one of those moments. A crack in the certainty we take for granted, a reminder that there are still things we don't understand. In the months following the sighting, several witnesses began comparing notes more carefully. They realized that the timeline of events was more complex than initially reported. The first person to spot the object was a ramp worker named Thomas Rodriguez. He had been directing a pushback tug when something made him look up. He couldn't explain what drew his attention. There was no sound, no movement, just an instinct that something was wrong. Rodriguez had been working at O'Hare for 11 years. He knew the rhythms of the airport, the patterns of aircraft movement, the normal appearance of the sky. What he saw violated all of that. The object was perfectly circular, dark against the lighter gray of the clouds. It looked close, maybe 1,000 feet up, maybe less. He stared at it for almost a minute before calling over his supervisor. The supervisor's name was Angela Morrison. She had worked in aviation for 15 years and had seen her share of unusual weather and aircraft. But when Rodriguez pointed skyward, she felt her stomach drop. The object was real, it was solid, and it was hovering in controlled airspace without authorization. Her first instinct was to contact the tower, to alert air traffic control that something unidentified was in the air. But she hesitated. What would she say? That a flying saucer was hovering over gate C-17? Morrison made the call anyway. She reached the control tower and reported an unidentified object over the United Terminal. The controller on duty asked her to describe it. She did her best. Dark, circular, approximately 20 to 30 feet across, hovering motionless at low altitude. The controller thanked her and said he would check radar. Minutes passed. Morrison stood on the tarmac with Rodriguez and several other employees who had joined them. They all watched the object together, none of them speaking much, all of them trying to process what they were seeing. The controller called back. He said there was nothing on radar, no unidentified contacts, no anomalies. Morrison looked up at the object, clearly visible above her, and wondered how that was possible. She asked if anyone in the tower could see it visually. The controller said he would check. Another few minutes passed. Then the controller reported that personnel in the tower were looking in that direction, but couldn't see anything from their position. The angle was wrong, or the object was too small, or obscured by buildings. Morrison found this explanation unsatisfying, but had no choice but to accept it. By this time, word had spread through the terminal. More United employees came outside to see. A cargo handler named Marcus Williams brought binoculars. He trained them on the object and described what he saw to the growing crowd. The surface appeared smooth, almost polished. There were no visible seams, no markings, no windows. It looked manufactured, but not in any way Williams recognized. He had served in the Navy and had seen plenty of aircraft, both military and civilian. This matched nothing in his experience. A pilot named Daniel Harper was preparing for a flight when he heard about the commotion. He walked out onto the ramp to see for himself. Harper had logged over 8,000 flight hours. He had flown through storms, navigated mechanical failures, and dealt with countless unusual situations. But standing on the tarmac that afternoon, looking up at the unidentified object, he felt something he rarely experienced: genuine uncertainty. He had no frame of reference for what he was seeing. The object defied his understanding of aerodynamics and propulsion. Harper later described his thought process during those minutes. He ran through possibilities. Weather balloon? Too stable? Too solid? Drone? Too large, and drones in 2006 were primitive compared to today. Experimental aircraft? Possible. But why hover over a civilian airport during peak operations? Helicopter? No rotor wash, no sound. Blimp? Wrong shape, and blimps don't accelerate vertically at high speed. He eliminated each option until he was left with nothing that made sense. One of the most detailed accounts came from a mechanic named Robert Sanchez. He had been working on an engine near gate C-19 when he noticed people gathering and looking up. Curious, He joined them. What struck him most was the complete absence of sound. O'Hare is never quiet. There's always the roar of jet engines, the beeping of ground vehicles, the hiss of hydraulics. But even with all that ambient noise, an aircraft hovering that close should have been audible. The object made no sound at all. Sanchez watched through the small window in the engine cowling he was working on. The object remained perfectly centered in his view for almost 3 minutes. It didn't drift or wobble. It hung in space as if suspended by invisible wires. Then it moved. Sanchez described the departure as shocking, not just for its speed, but for its precision. The object didn't tilt or rotate. It simply shot straight up, maintaining its horizontal orientation as it accelerated. Within 2 seconds, it had penetrated the cloud layer and was gone. The hole in the clouds fascinated everyone who saw it. Several witnesses took photos of it with their phones, and a few of these images later surfaced online. The hole was circular, clean-edged, and allowed sunlight to stream through. It remained visible for approximately 10 to 15 minutes before the clouds gradually closed over it. Meteorologists later suggested it could have been a fall streak hole, a natural phenomenon. But fall streak holes typically form over a wider area and develop gradually. This hole appeared suddenly and in the exact spot where the object had been hovering. A gate agent named Patricia Lopez was inside the terminal when she heard about the sighting. She rushed to a window and looked out just in time to see the hole in the clouds. She didn't see the object itself, but she saw the aftermath. She later described feeling a mix of frustration and fascination. Frustration that she had missed the main event, fascination that something so unusual had happened right outside her workplace. Lopez became one of the few witnesses willing to speak on camera when reporters began investigating the story. In the weeks after the incident, some witnesses reported being questioned by United Airlines management. The company wanted to understand what had happened, but they also seemed concerned about public perception. Aviation is built on trust. Passengers need to believe that airlines and airports operate safely and professionally. Stories about UFOs hovering over terminals don't inspire confidence. Some employees felt pressured to downplay what they had seen, to describe it as less dramatic than it actually was. Others refused to back down, insisting their accounts were accurate. One ramp supervisor later revealed that he had been told to avoid speaking to the media. He was not explicitly forbidden, but the message was clear. The company preferred that employees keep quiet about the incident. This supervisor, who requested anonymity, described feeling conflicted. On one hand, he understood the company's position. On the other hand, he felt the public deserved to know what had happened. In the end, he spoke to a reporter on the condition that his name not be used. The FAA's handling of the incident drew criticism from several aviation safety organizations. The National Aviation Reporting Center on Anomalous Phenomena, or NARCAP, analyzed the case and concluded that the FAA had failed in its duty to investigate. NARCAP is a group of scientists and aviation professionals who study unexplained aerial phenomena from a safety perspective. They argue that regardless of whether the object was extraterrestrial, experimental, or something else entirely, it represented a potential hazard to flight operations and should have been investigated thoroughly. NARCAP's report pointed out several troubling aspects of the FAA's response. First, the agency claimed there was no radar contact, but they did not explain why. Radar systems at O'Hare are sophisticated and redundant. If an object was hovering at 1,500 feet for several minutes, at least one system should have detected it. The fact that nothing was recorded suggests either a failure of the radar systems or characteristics of the object that made it undetectable. Either scenario warranted investigation. Second, the FAA dismissed the incident as a weather phenomenon without consulting meteorological experts or examining the evidence. Witnesses described a solid, metallic object with defined edges and structure. This does not match any known weather phenomenon. The FAA's explanation seemed designed to close the case quickly rather than pursue the truth. Third, the agency did not interview witnesses or attempt to gather detailed testimony. In a typical aviation incident, investigators would speak to everyone involved, reconstruct the timeline, and analyze all available data. None of this happened at O'Hare. The FAA issued a brief statement and moved on. Some researchers have speculated about why the FAA might have been reluctant to investigate. One theory suggests that the agency was aware of what the object was, but chose not to disclose that information. If the object was a classified military aircraft or drone, acknowledging its presence would compromise operational security. The FAA might have been instructed to dismiss the incident to protect classified programs. Another theory is simpler. The FAA was genuinely unaware of what the object was and preferred to avoid opening a case it couldn't solve. Unexplained phenomena are uncomfortable for bureaucracies. They create paperwork, invite scrutiny, and offer no clear resolution. By dismissing the incident as weather, the agency avoided all of that. This explanation is less conspiratorial but equally troubling. It suggests that the FAA prioritizes administrative convenience over genuine investigation. A third possibility is that the FAA simply didn't believe the witnesses. Despite their credentials and experience, the agency may have assumed they were mistaken or misidentified something mundane. This would be consistent with the historical treatment of UFO reports, which are often dismissed regardless of the credibility of the witnesses. Whatever the reason, the FAA's response left many questions unanswered, and those questions have lingered for years. In online forums and aviation communities, the O'Hare incident is still discussed and debated. New witnesses occasionally come forward, people who were at the airport that day but didn't report what they saw at the time. Some were passengers who happened to look out a terminal window at the right moment. Others were employees who feared ridicule or professional consequences. One such late witness was a businessman named Gregory Finch. He had been waiting for a flight in Concourse C when he noticed a commotion outside. People were gathered at the windows, pointing and talking. Finch joined them and saw the object hovering in the distance. He watched it for about a minute before it shot upward. Finch didn't think much of it at the time. He assumed it was some kind of advertising stunt or promotional event. Only later, when he read about the incident online, did he realize that no one had ever explained what the object was. Finch's account is interesting because it suggests that even more people may have witnessed the event than originally reported. O'Hare is always crowded. Thousands of passengers pass through the terminals every hour. If even a fraction of them saw the object, the number of witnesses could be far higher than the dozen or so who came forward initially. Another late witness was a photographer named Jennifer Kowalski. She had been at O'Hare that day to pick up a friend. While waiting outside the terminal, she saw the object and instinctively raised her camera. She took several photos before the object disappeared. But when she reviewed the images later, she was disappointed to find that the object appeared as little more than a dark smudge. The distance and lighting made it difficult to capture detail. Frustrated, she deleted the photos and forgot about the incident. Years later, she regretted not keeping them. Even blurry images might have provided some additional evidence. The lack of clear photographic evidence is one of the most frustrating aspects of the case. In an age where nearly everyone carries a camera, it seems impossible that no one captured a detailed image of the object. But phone cameras in 2006 were limited. Resolution was low, zoom was minimal, and low light performance was poor. The overcast conditions and distance made photography difficult. Most people who tried to take pictures ended up with images too unclear to be useful. One exception is a photo taken by a United employee whose name was never released. The image shows a dark, disc-shaped object against the grey sky, hovering above the terminal building. The photo is grainy and lacks detail, but it does show a clearly defined circular shape. This image has been analyzed by several researchers and is generally considered authentic, though skeptics argue it could show a bird, a piece of debris, or a digital artifact. If you found this story intriguing, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed something in the sky you couldn't explain? And if you want to hear more mysteries like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode.